Hi guys, welcome to Little Wicket Railway. I'm Rob and in this video we're building a G-gauge railway. Ages ago I went to the local flea market and someone was selling some G-gauge stuff. An LGB train set and a box full of bits, and I didn't have any G-gauge stuff before then, but a quick Google told me that the price was pretty good and I couldn't resist getting it. After that it sat in the corner of the workshop for a while, and then as you can see I got a few bits out and put them on the shelf just as a static display. I can't really set this up in the garden, but seeing it on the shelf got me thinking. The shelves already go quite a long way around the room, and with a bit of modification maybe I could build an end-to-end layout up there. Since then, I've been keeping my eye on eBay and buying up bits of track, and finally, I think I've got everything I need and it's time to give this a go. But the first thing I need to do is clear the shelves, and whilst I'm doing that, let's talk about the world of G-gauge and larger trains, because this was all new to me and the bigger scale stuff can be a bit confusing. The G in G-gauge or G-scale either stands for Garden, which is where many of these railways are built, or Gross, which means large in German. And when talking about this, we need to be careful we don't confuse gauge, which is the distance between the rails, and scale, which is all to do with relative size. There's a distance of 45mm between the rails for G-gauge track, and if we're using it to model standard gauge track, then that gives us a scale of 1:32. And that 1:32 scale is somewhat confusingly referred to as gauge 1 or 1 gauge. However, the track I'm using is from a company called LGB, but the scale of their models is actually closer to 1:22.5, which would mean we're modelling a 1 metre narrow gauge railway if everything was scaled up. And 1:22.5 is generally referred to as G-scale. Hopefully you're still following. In the UK, LGB is the main brand I've come across, which is now owned by Marklin, but other brands that come up frequently are Bachmann and Pico. It's not super easy to get hold of large scale ready to run models in the UK, mainly because they're not as popular as the smaller gauges like 00 and N. Also, most of the G-scale stuff tends to be based on European or US railways. Gauge 1 seems to have a wider selection of British locomotives, but based on what I've seen, most are kit builds, there aren't many ready to run models, and the models are a lot more expensive. And that's you up to speed on G-gauge and G-scale. Right, so that's the shelves clear, and before we put anything up there, I thought I'd just show you what I'm working with. So starting with the stuff I got at the flea market originally, and the main thing was this LGB train set. So if I lift it up, LGB stands for Lehmann Große Bahn. It's a German brand, and that translates as Lehmann Big Train, and it is quite big. So if I open it up, this actually was one of the original train sets they made from 1985, and given it's pretty much as old as I am, it's in fairly good condition. So it comes with one of the LGB iconic Staines locomotives, so obviously analog given the age of it, and a couple of wagons, so got like a box car there and an open wagon, a circle of track made up of 12 curved pieces, some people up here, and it's missing the controller, but not a big deal. I'm gonna make one of my own anyway. So yeah, that's the LGB set. Also with the flea market stuff, I got this Bachmann set, and this is called the Bachmann Big Hauler set. It's still got the instructions here with Bachmann, who shows you how to put your railroad together in sort of a comic book format, which I think is quite cool. So that comes with a big tender locomotive, a flat wagon, an open wagon, and a caboose. The Bachmann Big Hauler is actually battery powered and has a remote control. When I first got it, the batteries didn't work because they're fairly old as well, so I've replaced those and it now does work. It's also got a sound unit in it, but set your expectations now. It sounds more like it's got asthma, if I remember, rather than a actual steam engine, steam locomotive. We also got in the flea market these two individual wagons, and then there's this box of bits, so I'll get the camera and show you in here, but it's got some buildings, bit of plastic track. This would have come with the Bachmann Big Hauler stuff because it doesn't need metal rails because it's battery powered. There's a street lamp, buffer stops, so that sort of stuff. So that was all the things I picked up at the flea market. And then off of eBay, I've got another LGB coach. And then I bought some extra track. So we've got a brand new set of points there, which I think came from Gauge Master. And then a couple of these track expansion packs. So these allow you to build a siding. They come with a point, a buffer stop, and some straight lengths of track. And these are on special offer on Amazon quite some time ago. So I picked up 2 of those. And then I got a load of straight track. So some of that's from Gauge Master and some of it's off eBay. So some of it's brand new and some of it needs a good clean. So that's what we're working with. Let's get some of it up on the shelves and see if we can get some stuff running. Right, so I've got some track on the shelves and I've been messing around with different configurations to see what I liked and what worked. Originally, I had it in my head that this was going to be an end-to-end layout with a couple of sidings at either end, and I would run trains backwards and forwards like a shuttle. But having had a little bit of a play with that configuration, I didn't think it looked quite right when trains were running in reverse, and some of the wagons really didn't like being shunted backwards, especially around some of the curves and over the facing points. And that led to a bit of a risk of derailment, and obviously a layout here on a shelf at height above a 00 gauge layout, derailments are a bit of a concern. So what I decided to do was make it so that I could run trains always going forwards and that there would be no need to shunt things in reverse. So I've introduced some reverse loops at either end of the track. So I've got a reverse loop over here and a reverse loop down that end as well. And I'll put the track plan that I think I've settled on screen now so you can get an idea of how it's going to work. So introducing the reverse loops has some pros and cons. The benefits are that I can run trains continuously and they will always be facing forward. So they'll come around here, around this loop and end up going back facing forwards again, and same at the other end. These LGB points allow trains to push through them. So they can be set, for example, to go straight on. So a train will come in, it will go around the loop, and even though the point is set against it, because this is spring loaded, it will be able to push through the points and then the point will return to being straight on again. So you only ever have to set the points once here and at the other return loop, and the trains will just keep running through them, which is fantastic. Having a return loop on a DCC layout, or any layout really, where it's track powered through the rails, causes a few headaches electrically, but there's a pretty simple solution to this and I'll show you that later. And obviously, having a return loop means that not all the track can be on the shelves anymore. Some of it, as you can see, needs to be suspended in mid-air. And at the moment, I've temporarily got it propped up on these stands, but the solution I've come up with, because I don't want anything getting in the way of the 00 gauge layout, is to use some of this threaded rod. And I printed a spacer and a support here, and this will go into the ceiling and support the track like that. So that will sit up there. The other thing I've done is introduce a passing loop in the middle on the far wall over there. And using this setup means we can, in theory, have 3 trains on the go at the same time, occupying different sections of the layout. And as long as they're coordinated well, they shouldn't interfere with each other. Unfortunately, the shelves aren't wide enough to have double track all the way around, but for that short section, I think I've come up with a solution. Again, I've 3D printed some supports, which will support the track that is sort of hanging over the edge of the shelves. So I'll show you that again when we get to that section of track. So the next thing for me to do is to jump up on the ladder, get some fixings in the ceiling to hold these in place and get that elevated track supported at this end. And then once that's done, we can work our way around the layout, getting all the track fixed up in place. Getting these supports in wasn't the easiest job I've ever done. I used a plumb line to work out where I needed to fix the rod so that it lined up with the track support, then used a multi-detector to make sure I wasn't going to drill through the cables for the lighting. Then it was a case of drilling a big hole and pushing in a plasterboard raw plug that was designed to take an M6 bolt. Once I was sure that it was secure behind the plasterboard, I screwed in the rod and started threading on the washers and nuts. This would have taken ages by hand, but I 3D printed a circle, put a rubber band around it and then connected it to my drill. Spinning the nuts on that way was massively quicker, and then I could just tighten them by hand or with a spanner at the end. Each rod has 5 nuts on it, 1 at the top, 2 for the spacer midway up and 2 for the track support. And then on the end I used an M6 cap to cover the sharp edge. So that's the first one in. It took a bit longer than I hoped, but it's done and I'm happy with it. It seems pretty strong. I think it'll definitely take the weight of the track and the locos. Right, let's crack on with the rest. And from then on, it was just a case of repeating the process, and with each rod I got a little bit faster, and it wasn't long before I had all 6 fixed in the ceiling. The curves used for this part of the layout are LGB radius 1 with a diameter of 1.2 metres or around 4 feet. They're pretty tight and only really suitable for smaller locomotives and shorter rolling stock. When longer stuff goes around these, there can be quite a bit of overhang, so I've had to put the threaded rod supports quite a way apart. But even at this distance, it will still be a tight fit for something like the Bachmann Big Hauler. That's the first reverse loop complete with the 3 hangers, and they seem to be keeping the track in position quite well. I know the white shelves, plastic supports and metal rods aren't going to be everyone's idea of a good looking railway, especially considering that these layouts are usually found in gardens running through flower beds and around lawns. But I quite like it being minimalist. Maybe I can add in a few more interesting features around the layout later. And with this first loop in place, I thought I'd quickly demonstrate what I was talking about when I said that the trains could just push through the LGB points. This is a manual LGB point and it's got this lever on it that moves the blades from side to side. But even when the point is set in one position, you can still move it to the other position by pushing on the blades, but then it springs back to how the lever has set it. So it's currently set for straight on and we can roll this wagon over it. But then I can bring this coach in and it will force its way through the point even though it's set against it, and the blades then return to the straight ahead position. Same thing happens if I move the lever and change the position of the point. The coach turns off to the left, but this wagon can still force its way through. I'm not sure if you saw there, but the wagon's front wheels nearly lifted off the rails. That's because it's not very heavy and it's got plastic wheels. A heavier wagon with metal wheels would do a much better job, but so far everything I've pushed through by hand seems to be going through the point without any problems. And whilst we're up here, let's take a look at the wiring for the reverse loop. And I'm using this Gagemaster Prodigy Auto Reverse Loop module to make things simple. The 2 red wires connect to the rails on the main section of the layout, and then the 2 yellow wires connect to the rails for the reverse loop. Between the main section of the layout and the reverse loop, I've used plastic rail joiners to electrically separate the 2. Then when a locomotive crosses into or out of the reverse loop, the module automatically detects the required polarity and keeps everything running normally and prevents any short circuits. Right, so this has all been in place for a few days now. It all feels fairly secure and I'm happy with it. The one thing I'm really nervous of though is if anything, particularly on this suspended section, derails, it's a long way down to the ground. So what I want to do is put in place some sort of barrier, and I don't really want anything too substantial because I like how open and accessible this is. So what I've come up with, and the 3D printer has been very busy recently, is for these curved suspended sections, we've got pieces that will slot under the rails and onto the sleepers, like that. And then on the threaded rods, we've got these pieces that will thread onto there. And each of these has a little hole in it. And the idea is that I'm going to use this chain as my guardrail, essentially. So I can thread it through there, and then this will run from the pole to there, and hopefully that will be enough so that if anything does come off the rails and starts to topple, that will just stop it from hitting the ground and at least try and catch it. The other thing for the shelves, I've come up with these clamps. So this is 2 pieces. So you've got this clamp bit that fits over the shelf and then this bit that screws in. Again, it's got a hole through it for the chain, and these serve 2 purposes. So first one is to hold the chain in place, and the second one is these are floating shelves and they're quite hard to get perfectly aligned. So if I put these over the join, it will make sure that both shelves that are next to each other will be perfectly level when I screw this down on top of them. So I'm going to go around and put all this in place, and I will show you the finished result later on. And after a couple of hours of clamping together shelves and threading 30-foot of chain through supports, the railings were complete. And I'm hopeful that between the supports and the chains they'll be able to catch anything that comes off. I don't plan on having much scenery on the layout, but I thought that this corner looked particularly dull, and because the track comes off the shelves, it seems like the perfect place to put a bridge, and in true Blue Peter style, here's one I made earlier. I'll do a separate short video on the bridge another time. It's a very rough and ready build, not based on anything, but it definitely makes this corner look a bit more interesting. I also built the Bachmann big hauler coal stage that was in the box of bits and put it in the other corner by the first reverse loop. Who knows what scale that's meant to be, but it's definitely smaller than G scale. Another area where I've tried to keep things interesting is the passing loop. This is the passing loop, and it goes from this point here all the way down to a point over there. And as you can see, this second track really does hang off the shelf by quite a lot. So originally I thought I would put a second shelf in and have this double width, but what I realised is that if you're under 6 foot, and I very much fall into that category, that from ground level, with the shelf in place, you couldn't see anything that was happening back here. So instead, I designed and 3D printed these supports. They clip onto the existing shelf, they support the track from underneath, and they've got a stanchion here with a hole in to take the railing. So using this method, I can still support the track, but I can also see everything that's going on, even all the way back here. And with the passing loop sorted, it was onto the second reverse loop. I didn't film the construction of this one as it took me a few evenings, and it's essentially the same as the first loop except that it has 6 supports coming down from the ceiling, and off the back of it I've got this long siding that I can use to store extra rolling stock when it's not in use. And that's the layout essentially complete, so it's time to run a train, and for the grand opening I thought it was only right that we get a celebrity. So that's how I built my G-gauge shelf layout, which I think is going to be called the Malvern Sills Railway. It's obviously not a very serious layout, the emphasis is on fun, and I'll keep adding bits and pieces to it in future to make it more entertaining for people when they visit the railway workshop. If you've enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading more videos featuring this layout over the next few months, running in different locomotives and rolling stock. There'll be some G-gauge DCC fitting videos, I'll show you how I built my own G-scale shunter, and I still need to build a controller. So keep an eye out for those videos, and I'll also be uploading a full circuit from the perspective of the locomotive. Special thanks to all the YouTube members and patrons for their support, names are on screen now. That's it for this video, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you again soon.